genetic testing. And, once we test for genetics, you only need to do that test once, unlike a blood test where you can test your cholesterol level, now and in 3 months and evaluate what's changing. You can test your vitamin D levels, and that's important. I just tested someone who lives in the South, and I always assume, she's getting plenty of sunlight because she lives in Georgia, much more than New York. I mean, so vitamin D range is somewhere between 30 and 100 in the normal range. I don't think 30 is normal or optimal, I should say. It's normal within a range. And remember, when you take a blood test, the blood test just shows, it takes the average compilation of the population, and they say, okay, most people are in this range, that's normal. But that doesn't tell us what's optimal, right? So we were taught way back when that 200 IUs, which is the measurement of D, international units, they call it, like 200 a day was sufficient. Now we talk about 10,000 a day or 20,000 a day, depending on what your range is, what your value is, your blood test. So it's changed because we know so much more about vitamin D. And I have to say, I mean, people that are doing kind of functional medicine know more than a traditional doctor would. So a traditional doctor, conventional, might say, oh, 30 is normal, and then don't go to 100, like stay lower than 60. So when people say, oh, my doctor said my blood test was fine, I was like, let me take a look at it. And it was 30. It's like, no, that's not fine. It's got to be closer to 100 because it's a vitamin and it's a prohormone, we call it. So it has to do with the immune system function. It has to do with brain function. It has to do with bone function, bone absorption. So many different ways that vitamin D helps us, and vitamin D3. So her vitamin D was 6. I was like, oh my God, that's like way down. She goes, I wasn't feeling good. And my doctor said, well, not so bad, but it should be increased. I was like, not so bad. Wow, that would not be my reaction. And they recommended vitamin D too. So I'm like, no, that's not the active form. You need vitamin D3 to be the active form. So there's a lot of differentiation in practitioners. So again, you kind of have to be up on what's going on with it. But my assumption was that, oh, this is a woman who lives in Georgia in the sunshine, so she's probably getting enough vitamin D. But when they started doing some research, and I'm not exactly sure how they did it, thinking about kind of prehistoric time when we were hunters and gatherers, they think that we actually took in from the sun 30,000 IUs a day. Very different, right? And part of the problem with sun, one is that there's an ozone layer now that doesn't allow the full transmission. 2 is that we put on suntan block. And so we're not getting that absorption that we think we're getting. So, that's a little, story about what we think are limiting belief, the limiting belief, which is conventional in doctoring, and the limited belief of I even thought, oh, she must get plenty. But I always test people now because I learned enough from over the years that people that I thought would be fine were not fine, right? People that wouldn't have mercury toxicity had mercury toxicity. Or people that I thought, would have high cholesterol did not have high cholesterol. So you've got to, tell the truth about the blood test. But on the other hand, clinical tests don't tell the whole story. Just because you have a high cholesterol doesn't mean that you will go on to have heart disease. So that's the other side of the conventional thinking. Oh, we need to cut down on cholesterol levels. Well, why? Because no test has actually shown that high cholesterol leads to heart disease. There's the physical heart, there's the emotional heart, and they run together because we have in this country and really around the world, the number one killer is heart disease. So we would think on a common sense way, why do we have heart disease when we have all the drugs, all the cholesterol lowering drugs, we have all the heart surgeons, we have all the interception, we have the stents, we break up blockages, we do all this early intervention, and yet why are people still dying of heart disease? And it used to be just men. Today, it's the number one killer for women, it's the number one killer for men. Like, well, how does that make sense, really? With low cholesterol and heart disease being number one killer. And really the studies on cholesterol now, unfortunately, statin is probably one of the most used drugs. Statin is the cholesterol busting drug. But so cholesterol should be somewhere between like, 180, 190, 200 is kind of the cutoff that you want to be below that somehow, or hovering around that. But now with statin drugs, they'll lower the cholesterol to like 110, 130. And I'll look at people and I'll say, that is way too low. And they'll say, well, my doctor thinks that it should be as low as possible so I don't have a heart attack. I was like, no, but do you understand what cholesterol does? And they'll say, no. And I'll say, well, guess what? You need cholesterol to make every major hormone in your body. You need it to make testosterone. You need it to make progesterone. You need it to make estrogen. You need it to make DHEA, which is one of the youth hormones, right? You need it for just about everything. You need it for cortisol, the adrenogens. I mean, for your adrenal glands. I mean, it's a base molecule. So everything comes from that molecule. It's so low, like what happens? Oh, gee, I have high statin, high cholesterol, or low cholesterol. My sex drive is low. My hormones are low. I don't have any testosterone. I don't feel like doing anything. I feel like, I'm tired all the time. I feel sluggish. I get some brain drain. So all of those things factor into the big picture. It's not necessarily a linear line, but it is a factor in all these things. And so again, questioning is the name of the game. Telling the truth, not just telling the truth about yourself, but telling the truth, like seeing what is the truth in your clinical tests. So I love clinical tests for that reason. But again, I don't base healing on clinical tests because they don't tell the whole story. They tell a portion of the story, and then you've got to interpret it correctly. And then you've got to factor that into the whole person. So cholesterol is used as this base molecule for making all these things, right? So when I said the studies don't actually show that high cholesterol turn into heart disease necessarily. What does turn into heart disease is cholesterol plus inflammation. Nobody talks about that. I mean, that I won't say nobody. People do. Functional medicine doctors, we do talk about that because that's a crucial part. And I've been doing a test called HSCRP, which is high sensitivity C-reactive protein, probably for over 20 years. A lot of cardiologists don't even do it, but it's a sensitive way of seeing if the heart has inflammation, right? So when I do cardiovascular profiles, I'll go above and beyond what a traditional GP or internist would do, and even I think a cardiologist, unless they're functioning on a more functional or integrative basis with that. I mean, whether they're really kind of diving deep. So there are some cardiologists that do that, which is great. But traditionally, and what's happened in the healthcare system is doctors now are almost working for the insurance companies, unfortunately. When I started out, if you were a licensed practitioner, now I'm in New York State. So if I'm a licensed practitioner in New York State, I have the ability to write a prescription for blood tests, ultrasound tests, MRIs, CAT scans, I mean, any clinical test necessary. And I can treat with ultrasound, not diagnostically, because they don't do that, but if I needed to treat something, or electrical stim or anything like that. But the insurance companies in New York State now, I mean, everything kind of left with the advent of HMOs, right? The corporate structure controlling healthcare. So they've decided in the last few years that they won't cover. So if you were a licensed practitioner, you could do this, because some practitioners cannot, like as long as you were licensed, and they would cover it. Insurance companies would cover the testing, and they would cover the treatment, and they would cover whatever the doctor said should be covered, because like I'm a doctor and you're not. But then with the advent of network and HMOs, what happened is that they decided, they who are not doctors, the corporate managers decided, oh, we will cover this, we won't cover that. We'll cover this, we won't cover that. It's like, well, who are you? Well, that's just the way it is, right? So that was happening 20, 30 years ago. Now it took a long time to happen with blood test coverage, but it is happening somewhat, where you'll hear from doctors, and again, I can't say for any other state, oh, I'll say, I want you to take this blood test. Okay, I'm gonna do my annual panel. Okay, tell them, like, include this. Oh, he said no, or she said no. Why? Because my insurance won't cover it. I'm like, what? that's not a doctor's decision, right? I won't write a prescription for this test that I think you need because your insurance won't cover it. That should be malpractice. Now, granted, everyone's concerned with out of pocket and this and that, but you're not getting good health care if that's what your doctor returns with. I'm like, well, that's crazy. I mean, that's like, the doctor should not be placating to the insurance company. They should be placating to you, their patient, and advocating for what they think is right. So it's all turned, which is crazy, which is why a lot of doctors are going out of the insurance company model and out of the network model and all of that. When you go to get your hairstyle, you don't say, do you take insurance? And like, that's not as important. I mean, I like to get my hairstyle, but my hair is not as important as my health, I would say. But we've kind of relegated it to that level of, does my insurance cover it or not? Way back when, every insurance company would cover every licensed practitioner, right? If the doctor authorized it. Deductibles were $100 when I got into practice, $100. And people were paying, I don't know, maybe $50, $60 a month, and things were covered. Then fast forward, I had patients that were paying a fortune for health insurance, and they had $10,000 deductibles. This is not part of my discussion today, but it's crazy. I mean, it really is crazy what has happened to traditional healthcare, that healthcare companies that are making massive amounts of money are the ones deciding what healthcare they will cover and what healthcare they won't. And the truth is that if you fight hard enough and long enough and you have an advocate, which I was for my mother for many years and for me and my family, because I know better and I know how to fight and I know how to fight for what's right, they will eventually come around. But I say this is kind of sacrilegious because people that are the most ill won't fight for themselves, or they don't have someone who's a health advocate for them. And so they will lose coverage. I mean, there's so many movies about this, right? I think Tom Cruise or somebody was in it, or Matt Damon was in that movie about health insurance companies that don't cover when people really need it. So it's a travesty. I mean, it really is a travesty, and it's going on today. So even hospitals now in the corporate world, they're determining to cut costs, and maybe not give good healthcare. So unfortunately, a lot of people they're thinking inside the box, not outside the box with healthcare, because it's not a one fit suits all in any of that. But I digress.